Hey everyone, I'm Diana Davison, advocate for the falsely accused and wrongfully convicted. In the first week of 2018, there was a media flurry around 4 civil court claims alleging that former Soul Pepper theater icon Albert Schultz was a sexual menace. After 4 days of headlines, Albert Schultz and his wife, Leslie Lester, who by association was also hounded out of her career at Soul Pepper, practically disappeared. I did a few videos on the case after reviewing the statements of claim, which had obviously been trumped up with legal input claiming the 4 women had been permanently damaged by Schultz's backstage antics, some only having performed in 1 or 2 productions. I thought Schultz should fight back, and I could see that all context had been stripped from the tales of horror from what was likely harmless horsing around or minor slights, transformed into overblown claims of trauma. 3 of the 4 women had gone on to successfully pursue exactly the career they wanted, and the 4th is still working, just less experienced. But when recently asked, I couldn't answer the question, whatever happened in the Albert Schultz case? No legal reply seemed to have been issued or reported in the last 6 months. When I mentioned his name to other journalists, they shook their head and said, "You're right, I completely forgot about him." And maybe that's what Albert Schultz wanted. Then a link showed up in my inbox 2 days ago. It was a feature-length article published by Toronto Life last week, beautifully written and researched by Leah McLaren. There is some stunning information about how the story was pursued and where they are in the legal bargaining. But Leah's tweet of her article only got 14 likes and 3 retweets. So a man's life was destroyed, the vindictive mob also demanded his wife's career be ended, and now no one seems to care. That is how easy it is to be disappeared in the modern Me Too era. In fact, on Twitter, the main response to McLaren's article, which she spent months investigating, was to accuse her of ignoring the women's experiences. Even though McLaren included the allegations made by the women, it is the asking of questions which is deemed oppressive. McLaren reminds readers that another woman, Leslie Lester, had built her career supporting women in the theater, but none of Lester's life work or credentials made a whit of difference when she was accused of... Actually, the comments about Lester in the statements of claim struck me as quite scandalous. Without even naming Lester as a party to the lawsuit, they made accusations against her personally without even giving her legal standing to defend herself. As such, I will not repeat their accusations here. McLaren writes that the initial alleged victim, Trish Fagan, said she was inspired by, of all people, Catherine Burrell. Now, I've done videos in the past to show why I'm confident that Burrell is a false accuser, but as an actor, Fagan apparently saw Burrell's speech on the courthouse steps as a Scarlett O'Hara moment, with God as my witness, and then dreamed of playing that role herself one day. That was back in May of 2016. Then, 15 months later, when the Weinstein story broke, the opportunity arose. You know, it surprises me how little self-reflection goes into these admissions. We've basically got a situation of workplace revenge. Someone feeling bitter and unhappy about a former colleague, looking for an opportunity to get them fired. Fagan says her main intention was only to force Albert to step down from his job. You know, that thing that he spent his life building. She put together her laundry list of allegations, and instead of approaching any of her friends who also held positions of influence at Soul Pepper, instead she called a lawyer, who apparently said something along the lines of, "Hey, why just get him fired?" Meanwhile, in another stunning admission, Julian Schur of the Fifth Estate says that he assembled a team of journalists to find a Canadian Harvey Weinstein. In what should be chilling to other people in the entertainment industry, they assembled a list of names and started pursuing leads. Remember, that list is still out there. It could have been somebody other than Schultz. He's just the name that, as Schur says, percolated to the top. McLaren writes, the idea that a public broadcaster would form an interdepartmental investigative team to identify and bring down an as yet unknown culprit is not just unusual. In my 17 years of journalism, I've never heard of anything like it. And yet, in the weeks and months after the Weinstein story, there was a sense among news editors and producers in the Canadian media that we, too, needed to get our man, whoever he might be. And as we've seen before, the victim of this hunt was only given a few hours' notice before the story was published. As one of Schultz and Lester's friends said, that Fifth Estate piece was the single worst piece of publicly funded journalism I've ever seen. The Fifth Estate, as I've pointed out in the past, actually informed the public that they waited to broadcast the story until the lawsuits were filed, so they would be protected. It's not the women's protection they were likely concerned about. Allegations in legal documents are protected against defamation suits. And yet, even with one of Canada's biggest defamation lawsuits against a broadcaster looming, that's Patrick Brown's case against CTV, no one seems to have found McLaren's article interesting. Now, I'm not a big fan of Leah McLaren, to put it mildly, but this was solid journalism, fairly presented. The first part of the piece basically tells you why people were willing to destroy Albert Schultz. He could be temperamental, and he had too much control in the company. He might belittle and humiliate you one moment, then be your biggest cheerleader the next. He had annoying qualities that often go hand in hand with success. His critics were happy to benefit from his success, and then gleeful to strike him down when they felt that they didn't need or want him anymore. And the best way to do that was a Me Too story. McLaren reports that the lawsuit is being negotiated, and instead of the millions demanded, it will likely be resolved in a few thousand. Everyone is eager to bring it to an end. And when it is resolved, no one's going to feel good about what happened. The question is whether or not we will continue to support this callous destruction of human life. Trish Fagan said she just wanted to have Albert Schultz step down from his position. Then the lawyers had a different idea. Then CBC added their wish to the list. Then it grew into a public execution. And the public played their part, gleefully cheering it on, as we have historically always done. This is why we stopped having public executions. The public simply enjoys it too much. Well, Fagan got more than she bargained for, and for her, Booth, Bentley, and Miller, it's too late to turn back now, even if they wanted to. When the lawsuit ends and Fagan tries to give her speech on the courthouse steps, the dramatic moment that she's been planning for over 2 years, the audience should not applaud. It is the job of thinking people not to be on the side of the executioners.